There is a plant that grows 12 feet in a single summer. It produces fiber whiter and stronger than anything from a tree. 500 plants were tested. One of them turned out to be better than any tree alive for making paper. Cheaper to grow, faster to harvest, and stronger on the page. You were never told about this, and by the end of this video, you will know how to make paper from 3 plants you can grow in a pot without cutting a single tree. Thousands of years before the first commercial paper mill ever opened its doors, civilizations on 3 separate continents had already figured out how to turn plants into paper. Not trees, not timber, not lumber from old-growth forests. They used reeds from riverbanks, bark from fast-growing shrubs, stalks from plants that regrew every season without replanting. These were not primitive experiments. They were advanced systems refined across centuries and passed down through generations. The paper they made outlasted empires. Some of it still exists today in museum vaults and temple archives, and not one sheet required the cutting of a single tree. 5,000 years ago, along the banks of the Nile River in Egypt, tall green reeds grew in thick clusters at the edge of the water. They had triangular stalks and feathery flowering heads that swayed in the warm wind above the marsh. Some reached 16 feet tall. The Egyptians called the plant aru. Today, the world calls it papyrus, and the English word paper itself descends directly from its name. Egyptian workers harvested the reeds by hand. They peeled away the tough green outer rind and sliced the soft white core into thin strips. They laid those strips side by side on a flat stone surface with the edges barely overlapping. Then they placed a second layer of strips on top running in the opposite direction. They pressed the 2 layers together under heavy stones and left them in the sun. The natural sap inside the pith acted as a glue. When the sheets dried, they were smooth, flexible, and strong enough to roll into scrolls that traveled across the ancient world. For 3,000 years, papyrus was the most important writing surface in the Western world. But the Egyptians did not stop at paper. They wove the stalks into baskets and sandals, bundled them into boats, and burned the roots for fuel. One plant from a riverbank became the foundation of daily life for millions of people. No forest was touched. The answer grew in a marsh. Half a world away, and centuries later, another civilization solved the same problem with a completely different plant. In the year 610, a Korean monk named Dancho arrived in Japan carrying the knowledge of Chinese papermaking. And over the next 1,300 years, the craft evolved into something extraordinary. They called it washi. The key was a small, fast-growing shrub called kozo, the paper mulberry. It grew wild across the hillsides and could be cut to the ground and would return the following spring without replanting. Workers stripped the inner bark from young branches, soaked it in cold mountain streams, and boiled it in iron pots with wood ash. Then they beat the softened fibers by hand with wooden mallets until the material separated into a fine white slurry. Using bamboo screens, they scooped thin layers of fiber from wide stone vats and laid the wet sheets out to dry in the open air. The result was a paper so thin you could see light through it, but it was stronger than cloth. It resisted tearing. It lasted centuries. Japan printed its national banknotes on washi until 1950. Rembrandt used it for his finest prints in the 1600s because no European paper could match its quality. Today, 90% of all washi still made in Japan uses paper mulberry as its primary fiber. The craft is registered with UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. That same shrub crossed the largest ocean on Earth. Long before any European ship entered the Pacific, Polynesian navigators carried paper mulberry cuttings aboard their voyaging canoes. Genetic studies have traced the plant's journey from Taiwan through New Guinea and into the far scattered islands of the remote Pacific. It may be the most widely transported fiber crop in all of human history. Across Polynesia, they stripped the inner bark, soaked it in water, and beat it with wooden mallets against smooth stone anvils until it spread into wide, flexible sheets. They called it tapa. In Samoa, it was siapo. In Fiji, it was masi. In Hawaii, it was kapa. Each island culture developed its own patterns and dyes and ceremonial traditions around this one material. Tapa was not just fabric, it was wealth, it was identity, it was exchanged at weddings, presented at funerals, and draped across the shoulders of chiefs. The earliest stone bark beaters ever discovered date back 8,000 years to Guangxi in southern China. Across dozens of island nations, the inner bark of a shrub that regrows after every cutting became clothing, ceremony, currency, and art. Not a single tree was cut. Now consider what replaced all of this. Walk into any office building today. Look at the printer trays stacked full, the cardboard boxes piled in the loading dock, the paper towels in the restroom, the packaging wrapped around every product on every shelf in every store you have ever walked through. All of it comes from trees. The global paper and forest products market is valued at over $334 billion. Every year, the world produces more than 400 million tons of paper and cardboard. An estimated 4 billion trees are cut down annually for that purpose alone, accounting for roughly 35% of all deforestation on Earth. A pine tree takes 20 to 30 years to grow before it can be harvested for pulp. And even after all that time, nearly a third of the wood by weight is lignin, the hard resin that bonds cellulose fibers together inside the trunk. It has to be removed before those fibers can become paper. Removing it requires toxic chlorine-based chemicals and enormous amounts of heat and energy. That lignin is also why every piece of paper you have ever owned eventually turns yellow. Every sheet sitting on your desk right now is slowly changing color because the tree it came from was full of a substance that should never have been there in the first place. Satellite imagery has shown a 5-fold jump in deforestation driven by pulp plantations in Indonesia alone between 2017 and 2022. Forests that took centuries to grow are being leveled in weeks to feed mills producing a product inferior to what a marsh reed and a shrub were making 5,000 years ago. In the 1950s, the United States Department of Agriculture launched a massive screening program to find annual plants that could replace trees for paper production. They tested 500 species. They were looking for something that grew fast, produced high-quality fiber, and could be cultivated on ordinary American farmland without the decades-long wait that timber plantations required. In 1960, they announced their results. One plant stood above every other candidate. It was called Kenaf, an annual crop first domesticated in Sudan and East Central Africa as far back as 4000 BC. It belongs to the same botanical family as okra and cotton. It grows from seed to 12 or 14 feet tall in 4 to 5 months. A single acre of Kenaf produces 3 to 5 times more usable fiber per year than an acre of southern pine. And southern pine is the backbone of the entire American paper industry. The advantages went further. Kenaf contains only about 9% lignin compared to 29% in pine. Far fewer chemicals are needed to process it into pulp. Less heat, less bleaching, less toxic waste. The resulting paper is whiter, stronger, more resistant to yellowing, and holds ink better than standard wood pulp paper. Researchers estimated that unit production costs would run roughly half what it costs to produce the same volume from timber. In 1987, the Bakersfield Californian printed an entire edition on Kenaf newsprint, 83,000 copies. It was the first time a major American newspaper had been printed on fiber from a non-wood source. Sections of the St. Petersburg Times and the Houston Chronicle followed. The paper was stronger and brighter. It did not yellow. Production costs came in 25% lower than conventional wood-based newsprint. Planning began for a commercial Kenaf pulp mill. The economics were sound. The fiber was superior. The science was settled. Then the paper industry entered a cyclical downturn. Financing collapsed. USDA research funding for Kenaf had already been cut off in 1978 when national attention shifted to the energy crisis, and the entrenched timber companies, with billions of dollars invested in southern pine plantations and teams of lobbyists on Capitol Hill, had no interest in watching their feedstock become obsolete overnight. By 1995, the total commercial Kenaf acreage in the entire United States was roughly 2,500 acres. After decades of government-funded research proving Kenaf was the single best non-wood fiber for paper production, the crop was quietly abandoned. This is not a conspiracy. This is capital allocation. A plant that grows from seed to harvest in 5 months cannot generate the same return on investment as a pine plantation that locks up land and capital for 3 decades. A crop that any farmer can grow from saved seed cannot create recurring revenue for a seed company. A fiber source that needs minimal chemical processing does not benefit the companies selling those chemicals. The funding went elsewhere, the lobbyists kept working, and 4 billion trees kept falling every single year. So here are the 3 plants, 3 continents, thousands of years of documented use, and every one of them will grow in a container on your patio. The first is Kenaf. It is an annual with a life cycle of 100 to 130 days. Plant it after the last frost. Full sun, loose, well-draining soil. It germinates within a week. In warm climates, the stalks will reach 8 to 14 feet by late summer. In a large container of 10 gallons or more, it will grow 6 to 8 feet on a sunny patio or balcony. The leaves are edible and rich in protein. In parts of Africa, it is grown as a food crop. The seeds produce oil, but the real treasure is in the stalk. That tall green stem contains some of the finest paper fiber found in any plant on Earth. Harvest by cutting at ground level when the plant stands 6 feet or taller. 1 plant, 1 summer. Enough raw fiber to produce dozens of sheets of beautiful paper. The second is paper mulberry. It is native to Taiwan and Southeast Asia, a slender, fast-growing shrub that sends out root suckers freely. It spreads on its own and is easy to propagate from cuttings. Cut it to the ground in winter, and it regrows from the stump by spring. In a container, grow it as a managed bush. Harvest bark from first-year branches about 1 inch in diameter, full sun to partial shade. Most soil types, hardy across a wide range of climates from the American South to the Pacific Northwest and everywhere in between. The third is papyrus, the same plant the Egyptians used 5,000 years ago, a tall sedge that grows in water, native to Africa, and now naturalized in Florida, Louisiana, California, and Hawaii. Grow it as a bog plant in a large container like a half barrel or a wide basin. Submerge the pot in a few inches of standing water or keep the soil permanently soaked. Full sun, rich soil. In warm zones, it can reach 10 to 13 feet outdoors. In containers, expect 4 to 6 feet. In cold climates, bring it indoors before the first freeze or treat it as a warm season annual. 3 plants, a pot, some soil, sunlight. That is all they ask. Now here is how to turn each of these into paper you can hold in your hands. For Kenaf, cut the stalks and soak them in water for 1 to 2 weeks. This process is called retting. The outer bark will loosen and soften. Strip the long bast fibers away from the woody inner core. Drop those fibers into a pot of water with a few tablespoons of washing soda. Boil gently for 2 to 3 hours until the fibers feel soft and pliable. Rinse them clean, then beat them with a mallet or blend them in a kitchen blender until you have smooth pulp. Fill a shallow tub with water and stir in the pulp. Take a simple screen frame made from a picture frame fitted with fine mesh and dip it flat into the tub. Lift it evenly. A thin layer of fiber will settle across the screen. Press it gently with a sponge or cloth to remove excess water. Flip the wet sheet onto a piece of cotton fabric. Press flat. Dry it in the sun or against a smooth wall. What you are holding when it dries is a sheet of paper that will not yellow. Stronger and brighter and longer lasting than anything from a tree. For paper mulberry, harvest branches about 1 inch thick. First-year growth works best because the bark strips cleanly. Steam or soak the branches to loosen the bark. Peel the inner bark away from the outer layer. Boil it in water and wood ash or washing soda until the fibers soften and fall apart. Rinse thoroughly. Beat the fibers with a wooden mallet or blend into pulp. Use the same screen dipping method. The result is thin, translucent, almost luminous paper. The same material Japanese artisans have made for over 1,000 years. Strong enough for bookbinding, lampshades, calligraphy, and fine art prints. Closer to cloth than anything you would buy at an office supply store. For papyrus, the method is different and even simpler. Cut fresh green stalks, peel away the tough outer rind, slice the soft white inner pith into thin flat strips. Soak them in water for several days until they soften slightly. Lay them side by side with edges just barely overlapping. Place a second layer on top, running perpendicular to the first. Press both layers under heavy weight for 1 to 2 days. The natural sap bonds the layers as they dry. When you lift the weight, you are holding papyrus, the same material that carried the geometry of Euclid and the words of pharaohs across 5 millennia. A plant that produces paper fiber in 5 months and regrows from the same root every season generates zero recurring revenue for a timber corporation. Zero revenue means no lobby, no research funding, no voice in any political conversation that matters. Because it grows aggressively without industrial management, paper mulberry has landed on invasive species lists across multiple states. Municipalities spend public money to tear it out of parks and roadsides. Kenaf sits in agricultural databases that no one reads and no one funds. Papyrus is sold at garden centers as a decorative pond accent and nothing more. 3 plants, 3 continents, 5,000 years of proven use. Not one ever required cutting down a single tree. And yet 4 billion trees fall every year to make paper that yellows in decades, while the alternative grows back in months. Oh, and if longevity fascinates you, my friend runs a channel called Centenarian's Garden, all about blue zone secrets and what actually helps people live past 100. Go check them out. You won't regret it.